You're listening to ABC Radio and Help Me, I'm a Comedian. This is a show where we ask a comedian to come in and share a moment or an issue of pain from their life, and a psychologist at the same time to come in and offer some insight and guidance into that issue. Today's comedian is Gowda, who moved over from India 10 years ago, and she's talked about suffering from imposter syndrome and depression. And your psychologist, as always, is Dr. Rachel Hannam from North Brisbane Psychologist. Hello to you both.
Hey, Ashwin.
Hello, Ashwin.
Jo, can I start with you? Can you tell us more about this sense of being an imposter?
As it is, as an immigrant, you already have a bit of imposter syndrome because you've moved to a totally different country and you sort of can't help but feel that you're faking it, whether it's accepting the culture, the new culture, or letting go a bit of your own culture. So as it is, I had a bit of that. And, setting up my life here was a bit of a journey because I lived a very sheltered life in India. I lived there for 25 years, and there were so many things that I had never done before. Like, for example, running a household. I'd never done that because I always lived with my parents, and my mom and dad, managed most of the day-to-day living stuff, So when I came here and we had our own house, and even simple things like organizing the grocery list, doing the laundry, planning to do the laundry on a particular day, everything was a learning experience. And it really sort of affects you because if you're not the quintessential Indian doctor, Indian engineer, which I am not. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a software engineer, which is more the direct pathways of getting a job. I struggled a little bit to get the kind of job that I wanted to do. And that's when it really hit me hard because not only am I in another country, I am also suddenly unemployed.
What job were you planning to do and where did you end up instead?
Sure. In India, I worked a little bit. I used to play cricket. And I represented my university. So I sort of got into sports analytics, and I used to work as a video analyst in India. I worked for the BCCI, which is the cricket board for India, for Indian cricket. And I wanted to sort of get into that kind of a career when I came here because obviously sport is so huge in Australia. And I sort of had the confidence with my experience from India, I could make a relatively easy transition into sports. But I was unlucky. I really couldn't get into that kind of roles. So that really hit me hard. Suddenly, you just feel useless. Like you're like, what are my skills? And you're trying to learn so many things that is new to you, and doing that while also trying to land on your feet.
Such a huge adjustment.
It is. And I feel like people don't talk about that enough because it's this idea of, I'm an immigrant, I'm very hard, I'm strong, we just overcome obstacles, but it does take a toll on you mentally.
And the problem with mental, emotional, psychological struggles is nobody can see that it's happening for you. It's invisible.
Yeah.
You walk down the street and nobody would know how much you're struggling.
And also culturally speaking, like most immigrants that I know, mental health is not a big subject for us. It's not something that we openly discuss.
Well, I want to go through these issues in turn. We've talked about the imposter syndrome and then we'll get to mental health and depression and Indian attitudes a bit later. Can you just tell me a little bit more about the idea of not feeling genuine, feeling like an imposter? Like, just to give you an example, when I go back to India, my Malayalam is so weak. I feel like a 50% Indian because I just say the most boring, repetitive things. And people don't get to see the Aussie version of me. They get to see like a shimmered, a cut down version. Did you feel like when you're coming from India, you didn't get to be your whole Indian self? You had to do a filtered version.
For me, it was the opposite, Ashwin, because I felt so Indian. Like I just felt like I was Indian. I was not Joe. You know what I mean? Everybody looked at me as an Indian. Nobody looked at me as being Joe. And that really struck me. I was like, oh, because you don't feel that when you're in India, or like even for you guys, when you live in Australia, you don't feel like an Australian. But suddenly when you're outside that's the one thing that people are focusing on you. Right. And you just feel this pressure to be a little bit more Indian.
And is it isolating? Kind of lonely?
Yeah. Because there's so much more to me than being an Indian. Yes. I'm very proud of being an Indian. Don't get me wrong, but there's so much more happening, and it's like, but everybody looks at you through those lens, and that sort of limits you
as someone who's come into Australia and did you ever get the sense of wanting to feel more Aussie, to ham up your Aussie side or culture? Can you tell us about wanting to fit into this country?
Absolutely. I loved Australia because, like I said, I used to play cricket, and cricket in India is obviously very, very huge, and the Aussie team is huge for us. Like, I always loved the way the Aussies played cricket and their competitive spirit, and just the way they approached any situation. They never backed down and stuff. So I was always very fond of because they just seemed so fearless and also very friendly. And when I knew that I'm moving to Australia, part of me was very happy because the country actually played cricket, and it was not like US or some other country where you don't play cricket.
You're listening to Jo Gowda, who is a comedian who's moved from India 10 years ago, and we're talking to her about a couple of issues that she wanted to talk about. One is feeling like an imposter, and Rachel Hannam, a psychologist, is also here to help explain some of these issues. Rachel, Jo talked about having different personalities with different friends. I do the same. I feel like that's quite normal. Do we feel pressure to be the same person around all people, like one universal personality? Or is it okay to be different around different people?
Yeah, and this is a construct in psychology that's taught in undergraduate psychology called self-monitoring. And some people are what are called high self-monitors, and other people are low self-monitors. So often in artistic types, we get high self-monitors. So these are the chameleons, the people who can sort of change their persona depending. And it's actually a very adaptive skill to be able to mirror and match the body language and the behaviour of the people that you are with. And then there are those low self-monitor people who, they're not kind of checking to see that they're, fitting in and mirroring and matching, and they just are the same person no matter who they're interacting with. We might view that as very authentic, but we might also view that as not very sensitized and tuned in to the reading the room, so to speak.
Yeah, so both modes are okay.
Yeah, and it's a personality difference.
Before we move on to some of those other issues, Jo, did feeling like an imposter or wanting to fit into Australian culture add any anxiety? Did it make you a perfectionist? What kind of impact did it have?
Because we live such busy lives, people don't have the patience. And when you have an accent, people don't have the patience to actually listen to you or communicate with you. They just want to move on to the next customer, next whatever that they're doing. And I had I think my English I didn't have a heavy Indian accent, as to say. I mean, I don't like to give that example, but that's a lot of immigrants have that anxiety about how they sound or how people pursue them, while communicating with them. So that is a big source of anxiety.
Is that still something you carry around even to this day when you talk to people, you're wondering what they might think of you?
Absolutely. Like, especially when I'm on stage, I'm not only trying to be funny, I'm trying to enunciate my words. I'm trying to pronounce the words correctly. Like, I used to say competitor, like how you say competitor, but in India we say competitor or something. Yeah. So I've just changed my words. I've changed my
emphasis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's little things like that. So there's also that added anxiety where I need to slow down. I can't be too fast. And so I have a lot of things running through my head. I feel like when I'm on stage or even when I'm having like a normal conversation with someone, I'm artificially trying to moderate my
Indianness.
I hope it's okay to say this, but it might be interesting for the listeners to know that Jo and I did our stand-up comedy course together a couple of years ago. That's when I first met you, Jo. And at the graduation event, I still remember how funny you were. And my question is, did getting into comedy, because you really used your Indianness as, a device in what I saw, in your routine, did that help you to be able to kind of use it comedically and see the lighter side of your experiences here?
That's a very good question, Rachel, because I never expected to use my Indianness because I'd had such a different experience before that, because I was trying to not be so... I just wanted to be me. I didn't want to be a nation, you know what I mean? But when I started doing comedy, I just quickly understood that, that is something that is novel about me that people want to see and people want to... And if I can bring it out in a comedic way and make people understand and meet me halfway, that's such a great thing. And I try to use that now to sort of show the differences, yet the various similarities between the different cultures and how we're same at the end of the day.
Rachel, can you tell me a little bit more about imposter syndrome? What is it and what can we do about it?
It's very, very common. You know, there's so many great memes about it on social media that anyone who's on social media has probably seen one of them. Extremely common psychological tendency to experience self-doubt and worry that we are not good enough, qualified enough to be doing what we're doing. It's kind of the who do I think I am syndrome. You know, you're standing up there, who the hell do I think I am to be doing this, to be on the radio, to be, you know, and so many people early in their careers have it. And I don't think it's a completely unhealthy thing. I mean, the opposite of imposter syndrome and self-doubt is arrogance and narcissism. If your self-esteem is so high that you don't worry what anybody, you know, thinks about your credibility, that's worse. So it shows that you care if you have a bit of imposter syndrome. Of course, for some people, it's debilitating and they're racked with doubt, thinking that they're a fraud and they don't see their own skills, knowledge, ability, competence and credibility. I've worked with many clients who are struggling with this feeling. And even some of my early career psychologists who work for me in my practice admit to me that they feel like an imposter. And I have to remind them, you've been at university for 6 years, you've got a lot of knowledge, you probably know more than your clients, you can do this, you know, and they can, you know, start to relax and it gets better.
So is that the way out of imposter syndrome, just to be reassured that you can do this? Or is there a program that you put people through to get out of it?
Well, the research suggests that a good mentor in the workplace will help people because they can talk about, you know, how they feel like a bit of a fraud and they can get some reassurance, encouragement and advice around it. Getting together with other early, if it's in the workplace, other early career people, or if you're a migrant, getting to know other people who are also experiencing something similar is very helpful. And then, just working on your own self-esteem and your self-worth in therapy. Obviously, a lot of people talk about their early development and childhood, and some of this messaging comes from childhood, the criticisms, the put-downs that have damaged our self-esteem along the way and set us up for imposter syndrome.
Jo, did you have strict parents that were hard on you and do you think may have contributed to this feeling?
Absolutely. I come from a really big family. Like, I'm the only child, but my mom's side of the family is pretty big. So we'd meet up every weekend. So it was like pretty much Christmas, but every weekend. My parents were very strict. My family was strict. And I went to a school that was very strict I went to an all-girls school. So I feel like my school really shaped me in developing a lot of self-doubt and low self-esteem because, like I said, I was too much for school. Like, I was the class clown and that was frowned upon and criticized. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Even I just feel like I was bullied by the school, not by one person, but by the whole school. So
then you internalize those messages, like, I'm too much, I shouldn't be like this.
Yeah. But luckily, when I moved out of school, like when I went into my pre-university, my 11th and 12th and my bachelor's, my college was really nice and they sort of encouraged that cheekiness in me a little bit. And that's when I started like hosting a few events here and there. And my teachers laughed at my joke. And I was like, oh no, there's another side of this world. Not everyone wants me to fail and be miserable. And I took a lot of confidence from my college, and I think that changed a little bit. It made me change my thinking,
You're listening to ABC Radio, and Help Me, I'm a Comedian. I'm here with Gowda, comedian Jo Gowda, and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam.
Depression is not just one thing. We just use it, this one word, depression, but it's not. Even if you look on the Wikipedia page under depression, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's what I think, but I mean, I don't know, obviously, Jo, but what you had might have been something more like adjustment disorder with features of depression because you were coping with a lot of adjustment issues, a lot of changes, a lot of, so there's that kind of depression where we're actually reacting to a very difficult situation that's maybe ongoing and stressful. And then we can have depressive episodes, or we can just have low-level chronic depression for a long time, which is called dysthymia. There's all these different sort of manifestations of what we call depression. And then people just sometimes say, I feel depressed today. But if you're only depressed for a couple of days, you don't have depression. One of the diagnostic criteria is that it's gone on for longer than 2 weeks, that kind of thing. And we know that there is a genetic risk factor for depression. That's the other thing I'd really like people to know. About 40% of the variance in how we can predict depression we can attribute to genetic risk factors. That's a very psychobabble way of saying it's partly your genes.
Yeah.
It's in the family, but the environment has to bring it out. So if you're prone genetically to depression and then you go through a major adjustment, or you grow up with parents who are highly critical, or you've had some loss and grief, then you're more likely to end up with depression. And I also want people to know that it's treatable. You don't have to live with it.
Jo, talking about family, the family component, in Indian culture, we often don't talk about depression in our families. Was it acceptable for you to talk about depression within your family or culture, or can you talk a bit more about the stigma around it in India?
It's funny you bring it up. I haven't told anyone in my family. They don't know I'm seeing a therapist. My husband knows because he lives with me and he's different. But I haven't mentioned this to my parents because I don't think they would understand. B, they're so far away that they would just be extremely worried if I'm doing okay. And I think C, because the Indian culture is so self-critical, they will just criticize themselves, and I don't want to put that sort of pressure on them. My mom will I can just imagine her going into a loop of where she went wrong, what she did wrong.
Yeah, and it's such a classic thing, especially in older people, that once they know their child or someone else is seeing a therapist, then they worry. Whereas my friends say to each other, "Oh, you've got a good therapist? Oh, thank God." Like that. They sort of worry about them less if they know they've got a good therapist. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you said that it's treatable, because people forget that. They just think it's such a stigma. Like, it's like, oh, that's it. She's gone. We've lost her.
Yeah.
We've lost her to depression.
Yeah, exactly. It's so important people know that.
Rachel, what impact can it have when you have to cover up your depression from friends and family?
Well, it's like a double whammy, because depression is already largely caused or influenced by shame, by that negative self-evaluation of I'm not good enough and something's wrong with me, and all that imposter syndrome stuff, and internalized criticisms and negative messages from earlier in our lives. And then if you add the next layer of shame and stigma around having mental health struggles, it's just another layer of suffering. So it doesn't help at all.
Yeah. Have you been able to stay on top of that, Jo? That not telling your parents, have you been able to stay on top of the pressure that adds?
I just try not to think about it.
Yeah.
And they're quite a long way away.
Yeah.
And we also should be really discerning about who we tell. If we think our parents or our sister or our brother or our colleague won't accept and support us, or that they'll worry and freak out, then it's discerning to withhold that information. I still suggest to people that they only tell people who they trust will be non-judgmental, supportive and accepting. And for some people that might be nobody. Hopefully for most people that's at least one other person in their life. But I'm not going to... I have clients who've told their parents they're on antidepressants and then they're judged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like most things you say in this podcast, there's no one size fits all. You've got to adapt to your situation.
And you've got to look after yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't tell a person who you think's going to judge you.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
You said you're seeing a therapist now, Jo. Does he understand Indian culture and some of the pressures within it? Do you think that helps as well?
He's Australian, but he does such a beautiful job at really meeting me halfway and understanding where I'm coming from. I really find that very beautiful. And sometimes when he'll say something very profound, like he'll say, "You're going through something that is really big, and you should write about it, or you should speak more about this, because there's people in the community who might not have the courage that you do, or perhaps can't articulate it as well as you do." So he really says that I should come out and speak more, so that if there's anyone else out there in my sort of situation, it would encourage them to speak up.
Are you planning to do that through comedy or through some other means?
At the moment, I think I'm just going to stick to comedy.
Yeah. It's hard, isn't it, to talk about depression, death, grief, some of the really darker parts of life through comedy. Like we start with the lighter stuff. Do you want to eventually talk about some quite dark subjects through your comedy?
Yeah, definitely. I think that'll be just beautiful and very poetic for us as comedians. Like if you can make your pain funny, but share it with so many people, it's very therapeutic as well, I think.
Yeah.
I've seen quite a few comedians do it, and there are very poignant moments and then very funny moments because of the poignant moments where everybody's kind of on the edge of their seat.
Yes. Is Kannada your first language?
That's right, yes.
Do you do Kannada comedy as well?
I have done it just once because I never performed in India. I've never performed in India. I've only been doing comedy in Australia. So I haven't had a chance to actually go out and perform Kannada comedy. But there was an event here a couple of years ago and I did perform a little bit of Kannada stand-up for the first time.
Is your Kannada personality different to your English personality?
I think, the Kannada Joe is a little bit more cheekier because of the familiarity and, the colloquial references. I think she's a little bit more cheekier than the Aussie Joe.
Do you see that as your main audience or the Aussies as your main audience? Where are you now?
I feel like Aussies are my main audience, Ashwin. The other day I was just telling someone like, if I see a couple of Indian, now I'm assuming they're Indian, if I see a couple of Indian-looking people in the audience, I always start doubting myself. I'm like, oh, am I funny for them? Are they going to laugh? And because I've just gotten so used to performing for Aussie comics, and I sort of read them well than I read my own people.
Yeah. I almost look at them and feel like they're adding pressure. Like, you better be funny. We're in front of the white people now. Don't embarrass us. There's only three of us. Do you ever get that sensation?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you also get that classic feeling that they're thinking, I'm so much more funnier than her.
Yeah, that judgment comes back.
We can judge ourselves in any situation.
Yeah. You talked at the start about you had a more comfortable life in India in some ways because your parents did everything for you. In India, a lot of people have servants as well. Can you tell us about the transition? It's been 9 or 10 years since you left. What's that been like for you?
It's been a huge learning curve. But to be honest, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've become so self-sufficient and I love it. Sometimes I'll call my mom and she'll be so stressed and I just ask her what's happened and she goes, oh, my maid didn't come in today.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my maid hasn't come in 9 years.
Yes.
I think it's something so great about keeping your own house clean, doing your own dishes, doing your own laundry, ironing your own clothes. That is, it's just so different for me and I love it.
I know India has this beautiful side to the culture, the yoga, the meditation and everything. But when you have maids and servants in the house, there's a hierarchy as well, which I found a bit uncomfortable when I was back in India. Just you're not better than anyone, but you feel like, and sometimes they're quite rude to these people.
Yeah.
But when you move here, everyone feels more or less much more even. Has that affected you at all, coming to a more egalitarian society?
I've definitely noticed it. It hasn't affected me in any way, but I've definitely noticed, like, for example, like if you see a plumber in Australia, he's covered from head to toe, just for protection and because the nature of his job is a little bit risky. You know, he's got boots on, he's got work boots on, he's got his tools and stuff. But I remember very vividly whenever something broke down in our house, our plumber would come and he'd just be wearing thongs. Yeah. And he'd just carry his tools in like a plastic bag. Yeah. And he'd just come on a cycle, like a bicycle. And here these plumbers turn up in utes with, you know, so many different tools. And I just feel really sad thinking of that plumber.
Yeah. The plumbers here earn 6-figure salaries. They're earning much more than you are. It's a different position for the tradies over here.
There's dignity of labor definitely in Australia.
You told our producer that you stretch yourself a little bit because you've got to work full time, you've got to do comedy at night, and you're a mum as well. And sometimes you feel like you can't do any of them well because you're doing so many.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sometimes you watch something and it just inspires you and you have this urge to write down your thoughts. So, you know, find the joke or find the funny in something that you witnessed that day. I feel like I can't do that because it usually happens when I'm at work or, you know, you can't take the time away from your job to actually sit and do your hobby. You know what I mean? And Sometimes when I'm performing and I have this moment of, I don't think I'm doing my job. I don't think I'm giving my 100% at my job either, because my mind wanders into, if I see something funny, if I notice something funny at a meeting, I'm like, this can be such a great gag. This is such a great joke in here. And definitely as a mom, as it is, even if I wouldn't do anything and just was a full-time mom, I feel like I would still be so self-critical, let alone doing a job and having a hobby where even today my daughter's a little bit sick and I'm here. So, you're just so torn. And
Mother guilt.
Yeah.
When I had my first child, a couple of women were like, welcome to the club. It's a lifetime membership.
Yeah. Other things you can tell us that make it easier to adapt to a new environment, a new country, any kind of new place?
Absolutely. It's such a common thing for all of us, whether we move countries or change jobs. So if you are going to a new city, a new job, a new country, I would say learn as much as you can in advance. And I'm curious if you did that, Jo. Did you really educate yourself on Australia before you came here? Had you come here first on a holiday or anything?
No, I'd never come here.
I also sometimes suggest to people that, again, preparation and intention can make a difference. So decide what you want to be known for, not just what you want to do, but who you want to be when you get to that place as much as you can. This is particularly for people who are moving cities or moving jobs. Getting to know people is such a difficult thing. Sounds like you found that a bit of a challenge, making friends, building your social network. How long did that take you, Jo?
For me, luckily, my husband already had a bit of a friend circle here, so I could,
a ready-made network.
Yeah, piggyback on his friends.
Whereas some people are going into a new job, a new country, a new city, and they don't know anybody. I've had clients come to Brisbane, don't know anybody. So asking questions, looking out for as many opportunities as you can to connect, be brave, try out new things, explore. And I would say, for the first few months of any new situation, try not to take things personally. I think we've all been on the other side where there's a new person in town, a new person in the workplace, and we're all a bit wary of each other at first. It's not personal. We just kind of all take a bit of time to warm up to each other sometimes. So be patient. Don't take things personally. And that mirroring and matching thing with the high self-monitor, low self-monitor thing I was talking about before, this is a situation where it is good to be a high self-monitor and kind of match some of the behaviours and body language of the people that you're with. It definitely helps to build rapport, but not too much. You don't want to be copying every single movement.
Not a mime.
Not a mime. That could be very weird. And certainly self-care. I can't not speak about self-care, the importance of looking after yourself while you're in that adjustment period, because if you just take care of the basics around sleep and diet, then it's going to be better.
Is there anything for you, Jo, now that you're 10 years in, are you still adapting to Australia? Have you gotten rid of all the homesickness, or does something still linger?
I think it's a never-ending process. You just keep on learning, I feel.
Yeah, what's different about... Because my mum was homesick for, I would say, 7 years.
Wow.
And it was quite hard. But now she feels like she couldn't go and live in India. She feels really comfortable here. So I'm just wondering, is there anything at the 10-year mark that's different that you still feel like you need to adapt to? Like, you haven't found a footy team, obviously. You've got to get one of those. Is there anything else you're still trying to adapt to?
I'm very much like your mom. I think I've adapted myself too well to Australia that now I don't see myself going and living in India, especially now that my daughter was born here. So it's become a part of me forever now, her place of birth.
Do you feel accepted into Australia?
Comedy has played a huge role in me feeling accepted, and I just love that it's such a great equalizer that it doesn't matter who I am, what my background is, as long as I can make people laugh and they laugh. It's this amazing moment that you would know, Ashwin, that we're all in this together and we don't know each other, but we're just laughing at the same thing.
You have been listening to comedian Jo Gowda and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. Thank you both for coming in today.
Pleasure, Ashwin. Thank you for having me. Thanks.